Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 79. I'm delighted today to be joined by sports nutritionist Matthew Jones. Matthew, how's things?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Ben. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you, mate. It's funny times at the moment, but we're getting on with things. So, yeah, always good.
Yeah, you can say that again. It's challenging, isn't it? You know, trying to work from home with a 2-year-old kid is as challenging as it gets. That's for sure.
We'll dive into that in a second because obviously I mentioned you're a sports nutritionist, but do you want to just take us through your career so far? So who you've worked with previously and then take us up to your roles, responsibilities at the current day.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess like most people working in football, like in the applied setting, I started off as an aspiring footballer, played like county standard, tore my ACL twice, and meniscus and all those kind of injuries at the age of 17 and 18. It was actually during that injury that my kind of fascination in nutrition like began, really, because I was being treated by physiotherapists and strength conditioning coaches and things like that, but no one ever really told me what to eat. So I found myself getting kind of chubby. And I basically started reading to like fix myself in a way. And yeah, that's really where the fascination in nutrition began. And at the time, I didn't really know you could go on and like do that as a career because there wasn't really many sports nutritionists out there. There was obviously dietitians that like dabbled in sports nutrition, but it was never like a clear pathway. So from there, I went on to do a sports science degree. So at Leeds Metropolitan Sports Science. I didn't really enjoy many of the aspects of sports science. It was mainly the sports nutrition and physiology that really interested me. So I kind of like snoozed through that until the sports nutrition modules. And then during that, like after that, I did a master's in nutrition science at University of Chester. So during that time, my fascination and interest in nutrition just kind of escalated year on year, month on month. And during my studies, I was fortunate enough to take on some internships and work placements with the Welsh Rugby Union and Warrington Wolves. So that obviously was great experience. And as a young applied practitioner going into those environments and just working with athletes and just experiencing the camaraderie and the application of knowledge is invaluable, really. And I was able to work with some really top practitioners as well. So I was leaning on like Mark Ellison, for instance, at Warrington Wolves, and Adam Carey at the Welsh Rugby Union as well. So I was able to ask questions, and I was one of those interns that asked the stupidest questions. I was pestering them every single day, and they helped me massively, and I'm thankful for that. So yeah, that really helped me kind of set up or establish myself. So from there, those internships really gave me the confidence to go out into the applied world and work as a practitioner. So I basically set up my own consultancy as a result of that, and then started working initially with individuals, so individual athletes, mainly footballers, but also like rugby players as well, and rugby league players, and also some like members of the general public, so like corporate clients and things like that. And then I was fortunate enough to start working with Sheffield Wednesday a little bit, doing some consultancy work there. And then Stoke City. So Stoke City was actually my first like big club. So I started working with Damien Roden there. And we had some like really incredible years there with Stoke. It was kind of like the golden generation, if you like. We had some great success. That's 2 or 3 really great years. And when I look back and reflect on that time, we had an incredible team there. Right the way from the chef, Carl Engelman, he's now with the England Rugby, and right the way through, obviously, Damien, Joel Dawson, Paul White, Chalky. He's obviously some really incredible people within that team, and the players as well. That was fantastic. While I was there, I was offered the opportunity to go out and work with a unit of the armed forces over in Abu Dhabi. So I kind of, to be honest, at that stage, I was well within my comfort zone. I knew how to like manage nutrition within the United Kingdom, within Europe, if you like. I knew like the habitual diets of British people, how to kind of manage training, like periodization of nutrition within football. But then when I started interacting with like foreign players, so that's when I started to find, oh, wow, this is kind of challenging. So when I was offered that opportunity, I kind of took it thinking that this is going to be one hell of a learning experience. I'm going to go out into like the complete unknown, in the middle of a desert, where people are kind of fighting for their life, not necessarily fighting for a result. So yeah, I went over there, and I guess I'll touch on that in a little bit, because that's probably worth going back to revisit. But that was yeah, an incredible learning experience. I was there for maybe 3 years living in Abu Dhabi. Yeah, it was pretty awesome. And then from there, I was offered the opportunity to go over to America and work at the University of Oregon. So I was director of sports nutrition at the University of Oregon for a period of time. And on reflection, that wasn't the best move for me at the time. So my wife just fell pregnant basically on on the day that we were moving. And I mean, you've got kids, so you kind of know the whole pregnancy like roller coaster. So you can imagine like the culture shock. We went from Abu Dhabi sitting on beaches and like enjoying a fairly relaxed lifestyle while also being like stimulated in the sense that I was still working in football and things. And then we went to like rainy Eugene, Oregon, and then she was pregnant, and it was like a long way from home, and like it was kind of unfortunate because she basically pulled the plug. She went home. She really didn't like it. So she went home after maybe like 3-4 months. And then from that day onwards, I stayed out there and tried to continue working there. But it became like really, really challenging for me. And to be honest, it really influenced my like mental health. I became like really, really depressed in a way. Like, definitely depressed. Like I was like missing scans, like things like that, like things that parents should attend. And then, yeah, the only reason I kind of carried on going is because what an opportunity, like working in one of the biggest colleges, most successful colleges in American college sport. Like, I'm not sure if you've ever been there, but it's probably the most impressive facility I've ever seen. It was unbelievable. And I was also working with some like really inspiring people as well. So Jace Delaney, Ben Mackay, there was like really, really great people there. But yeah, so that was a real challenge for me. And it kind of came to a point where I had to make a decision. Yeah, this needs to end. I need to go home and be with my family. So then we moved back. We moved back to England and took on a consultancy role with Brentford, Chelsea Women, and West Ham. I actually missed a little bit. So while I was out in the Middle East with the UAE, I was also working with Stoke City. So you can imagine like that. This is going to sound ridiculous, but like every 2 to 3 weeks, I was flying back from Abu Dhabi to Stoke to work with them. And yeah, it was when I reflect on that, it was the craziest thing ever. I got like so many gold points. Like I got to a gold member with Etihad in the space of a year. But yeah, it was pretty crazy. And while I was in the Middle East, I also got offered the opportunity to go and work with the Saudi Arabian national team. So they were going through the qualification process for the World Cup, the 2018 World Cup. Jan van Winkel was the technical director, and Bert van Marwijk and Mark van Bommel was like the coaching staff. And I'd worked with some like Dutch players at Stoke, and kind of they recommended me. So I went over there and we had like a really successful campaign. We beat Japan in the final qualification game, and we qualified for Russia. Only the only disappointing fact was about a month later, Bert, the head coach, he failed to agree a new contract. So none of us actually went to Russia. But yeah, that whole qualification process was really, really amazing. Again, great learning experience. But yeah, so right now I'm working as a consultant with Chelsea Women, Brentford, and West Ham United in the Premier League, and also the United Arab Emirates. So also in the World Cup qualification campaign in the Asian qualification groups.
Awesome, mate. You got loads going on and some top clubs there. And yeah, you've mentioned one of our previous guests on the podcast, Paul White, Chalky at Stoke, and we've also had Jared on from the first team as well. So loads of familiar names in there. What I wanted to ask you, Matthew, is that with nutrition, it's a really, and we had Lauren Bannock on the podcast. I can't remember what episode it was, but quite a few episodes ago now. And I asked him the same sort of question in terms of, there's a lot of different views out there. And when you listen to these podcasts, a lot of people will speak from a certain side and they won't give like a neutral point of view and give the information that people need more than what they want to tell people. So what's your nutrition philosophy? And also, how do you establish that within the clubs that you, or players that you work with?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's a big challenge. You know, I think within nutrition, it can be quite complex. But I think once you understand like the physiology behind it and the real fundamental nutrition science, I think it's relatively easy to apply it then. But people often get confused, and it can get really complex. So if we kind of step away from my nutrition philosophy, my overarching philosophy as a practitioner can be kind of described as simple, meaningful, and with purpose. So simple is kind of like the way that I deliver things. So it has to be digestible, it has to be actionable and easily understood. So for instance, like practitioners can often get kind of caught up in using scientific jargon. And there is no kind of bonuses for using scientific jargon in the applied world. You don't get like a cash prize for saying muscle protein synthesis or anything like that. Like when you're working with athletes, you have to really like translate that into words that or things that they're going to understand. So like build or growth and repair. Not it might look great on paper, muscle protein synthesis, but in terms of the real world, the application of that build, growth and repair is a much better way of describing that kind of thing. So it also has to be actionable. So you need to be able to talk in the language of food, and not the language of like macronutrients. So for something to be actionable, the recommendation can't be you need to eat 30 grams of carbohydrate. It's you need to eat 2 pieces of bread or like 3 spoonfuls of rice, you know. So 30 grams of carbohydrate might be a great recommendation, but that's not actionable. A player can't go away and action that. So my like the start of my philosophy is that simple. It has to be actionable, easy to understand, and that's where you get real success. Because if you deliver those messages, it's actionable, and they're going to be able to use that and apply that. Again, coming out of university, some practitioners they get caught up in the research mind and kind of the too much of the technical aspects of it. You then need to like kind of progress along the process, and make that recommendation actionable. So what is it that they're actually going to be able to go away and apply? That's what they want to know. Really, they don't really care about the science and stuff. From there, you got the meaningful elements. So meaningful. So that's kind of where my philosophy, my technical philosophy comes in. So obviously evidence-based or evidence-informed, as Lauren would rightly put it. So everything has to kind of be kind of well backed with sufficient evidence, and don't intervene for the sake of it. So obviously with all the technology and supplements we have available to us, like people can kind of go a little bit gung-ho and go like too far into things, and so everything has to be meaningful. It has to serve a function, and then obviously the final part would be like the human element, so the purpose, so the coaching element. So it's like you have to deliver messages with purpose, with vigor, they have to know you care, you have to have a relationship with them, and yeah, so that's the 3 kind of elements of my overarching philosophy, really. So simple, meaningful, and with purpose. But if we go more into like the technical philosophy, so obviously we kind of touched on it. So evidence-based, individualized, so meeting the needs of the individual, both for them as an individual. So every individual has unique requirements, obviously depending on their like anthropometry, their age, gender, things like that. Activity levels, but then also they have different needs from sport to sport. and position to position as well, and like whether they're injured or not. So everything has to be bespoke to the individual. So yeah, and then in terms of my practice, I also have like a cyclical approach. So everything starts with analysis. So the first kind of month or so of me going into a new club or working with a new client is all about analysis, me learning about that individual, finding out what they do, what their comfort zone is, like what the habitual diet looks like, finding out what challenges they face, who cooks for them, who's their biggest influences, what their support network is. I think things like that. And then it moves on to, so once you have that analysis, you've got like all the information you need. You can then develop an intervention, like a specific intervention. That intervention can be anything from like a weight gain, body composition things, or like optimizing performance on game day, like various different interventions. And then it loops around. So with sufficient education and support, that kind of loops back around, back into the analysis phase. So it's kind of like a cyclical process. It continues to evolve, continues to learn. You learn from your own mistakes. You learn from the mistakes of the individual, and it continues to evolve and progress. So it never really stagnates. So that's kind of like my philosophy and my philosophy as a practitioner, but then potentially even my technical philosophy as well. And then moving on to like the how to establish that within a club, that can be a real challenge on one hand, but then it can also be like relatively easy and relatively quick. But it all boils down to like relationships, and trust. So if I go back to my work at Stoke City and also the Saudi Arabian national team, it was really easy. Because I had relationships there. I established a relationship with Damien Roden within about a month. I had his trust, and he already had the trust of all the players. So if he trusted me, the players trusted me. So I got like great success quite early on there. And also at the Saudi national team, like I had the trust of the coaching staff. I had the trust of Jan van Winkel. So I was able to then kind of establish my philosophy quite quickly and quite easily. On the other hand, though, I've also experienced some kind of environments where it's been nigh on impossible to like establish a philosophy. So if I go back to Abu Dhabi, so the military setting, obviously it's a hierarchical environment. I went in with no military background. I was a civilian. I wasn't ranked. I was basically like on the same level as like a pot washer, basically. No one knew what I was there for. They had no kind of understanding of how nutrition might impact them when they were at war. They just wanted to kind of go and fight the battle in Yemen and kind of come home to their families and maybe get a promotion up the ranks. The physical element didn't really come into their mind at all. So I literally spent 6 months like in an office, just basically being ignored by everyone. I had these high hopes, I like these aspirations. I had on my computer all these incredible interventions that were about to like change the world, but I just couldn't apply them because no one was there listening to me. So it reached a stage where I kind of like walked out of my office and looked around a little bit, kind of started to study what they did, like found out a little bit more about them. And I realized every morning they went to do like a jiu-jitsu like training in the morning. So it's like jiu-jitsu in the military in the UAE is big. They have to do it every morning, and they get kind of they get promotions off the back of it. So obviously they invest a lot of time and effort into it. And most of them were pretty good actually, and they really enjoyed it. So I thought to myself, okay, well, if I'm going to establish a relationship, I'm going to have to go and get involved in that jiu-jitsu class. So for the next 6 months, so obviously I'd spent 6 months already like twiddling my thumbs. So I kind of committed myself to 6 months of getting choked out for every single day, getting beat up, like black eyes, all sorts. But that really did work because we shared an experience. We shared an interest. It started conversations. The conversation started with like how are you, did you see the football on the weekend, to it actually progressed. After 6 months, I was invited to one of their houses, and one of the sheikhs actually came to the house, and we had a meal and everything. So it's pretty remarkable how like strong and powerful relationships are. But you just need to know how to make them and how to build those relationships, because once you build them, they're like almost unbreakable. You know, you think about yourself with friends. Like you can have friends for years and years. You might not talk to them for years and years, but that relationship is there. They still trust you, and it's difficult to break them. Yeah. So
Sorry, mate. I think that's really important because it's something that a lot of previous guests have talked about in terms of relationships, and we do probably speak about it we cover it to a certain degree in every single episode. But I think it's really fascinating to actually delve into how you practically went about it in terms of going into a situation. Because I was laughing when you said about being sat in the office with and everyone ignoring you, because the amount of sports scientists and S&C coaches that will be out there at clubs that will be going through the exact same thing as what you've done, they'll relate to that situation. So I think it's really fascinating that you then had to put yourself out there to get this relationship built, and then obviously you can start implementing the things you want to implement from there.
Yeah, 100%. I've experienced, so off the back of that learning within that environment, I've like kind of used that same principle in football as well. So you got to make yourself vulnerable, you know, like if you go into a new club, the head coach, he probably looks at you and think, oh Jesus, not another one of these mad scientists. I obviously fit the mad scientist bill. So you've got to really kind of make yourself vulnerable. And if you see them going into the gym at 5 a.m. in the morning, go and join them, because that's when a conversation is going to start. And you don't really know where that conversation is going to end. It could end really badly, but the chances are it's going to progress, and it's going to result in a relationship. And nothing bad ever came out of a decent relationship, you know. So yeah, I think like Fergus Connolly obviously talks like widely about this, and a lot of people do as well. And it's not unique to football. It's not unique to sport. If you look at like the best performing industries in the world, the best performing companies in the world, they all have at the core strong relationships, you know, and a buzz around the environment that they're working in, and people buzz off each other. So yeah, it's all ties back to that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one thing to cover, because this really fascinates me as well, and I've spoken to a lot of people that have worked across different cultures. Laurent was obviously one where we spoke about the World Cup specifically, and the players were fasting. It's something that we probably we're not exposed to as much working in the UK. There might be a few players, but as a whole, we were not really exposed to it. So I found that really fascinating. But speaking to different coaches that have worked in different cultures, what I'd like to know is what you've taken from a culture and then you apply in your current role with the clubs over in the UK.
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually, like right at the start in the introduction, I actually missed one of the clubs. I actually was fortunate enough to go and work on an Exos contract with CR Flamengo over in Rio, and that was like while I was working like with Stoke, so it was kind of like a consultancy role as well. So that was 2 seasons. That was remarkable, and I guess the learnings from that, working within that culture, is it really gave me perspective of what the performance department is. We're dealing with like performers, like Brazilian, South American footballers. They are 100% performers. They just want to get the ball. They don't really care about the gym. They don't care about what food they eat. They just want to go out and perform. So that really gave me some perspective on, okay, well, I just need to focus on getting the big rocks in place. I don't need to kind of delve too much into the fine details. As long as the big rocks are in place and people are being consistent with that, then that's going to allow them to perform to the best of their ability consistently over the course of the season, which is ultimately what the objective is. Their performers, we need to get them to perform as frequently as possible to the best of their ability. So I guess that's my learning from that culture. So it gave some real great perspective of the kind of the purpose of the performance department. And then from like working over in America and also the Middle East, I think the learnings there are like, you have to kind of see past the cultural aspects of meals. So like a mixed meal or a well-balanced meal in the Middle East is like chicken biryani. A well-balanced meal in America is like a burger. And if you look at like the macronutrient composition and the nutrient profile of both of those things, they're pretty similar, you know. So you have to look past the food and the vehicle in which those nutrients are delivered, and you have to see like macronutrients, carbohydrate, and individual nutrients, you know. So it's not necessarily, because if you start focusing on the vehicle in which those nutrients are delivered, you can kind of like get kind of stressed out. Because I was obviously British, used to like meat and two veg, going over there, and it was like, it's completely different. One thing that you cannot do is you cannot change their culture. So change the menu and try and add European foods and things like that. That's an absolute no-no. You have to align everything with what they're culturally used to. And that's, I guess we can kind of touch on that in a little bit, but that's where I think I kind of disagree with the whole stepping outside the comfort zone thing. I've got some things that I'll probably discuss in a little bit about that. But yeah, so the cultural learnings from there is you've got to respect their culture and their practices, and realize that, okay, well, they're high performers. They've been performing to like a pretty high level throughout their careers. So don't necessarily think you're going to go in there and change things, and they're going to all of a sudden become like world class or like a really elite performer or an even better performer, because the reality is that that's not going to happen. You just need to, yeah, really just get some perspective really. And
yeah, I think it's I mean, I don't know whether you get this a lot, but when I was working in football more full-time, in a full-time role, it was a lot of players must come up to you all the time and start naming meals that they're having. Is this good? Is that good? And this is what I have for breakfast. Is this what I should eat? And that seems to be the way, doesn't it, with nutrition, that people think that you're going to turn around and go, actually, no, you should eat this. And you say the same thing to everyone, whereas there's a lot of different considerations that you've got to make, isn't there? Like, you've already named the meeting the needs before and all the different things you've got to take into consideration, the likes of the player, the sport, the position, injury. There's a lot more to it. And I think that, and we have it in S&C, sports science, a lot, that the answer of it depends probably drives people mental. You're not able to give a 1 second answer, but that is the whole point behind nutrition, isn't it? And like you've just said, different cultures eat different ways. You're not going to turn around and tell someone in the States to eat the same way as you do over here, and you've got to try and find that balance, haven't you?
Yeah, exactly. And that's where you can go quite wrong, to be honest. And if you do get it wrong, then you lose the players, you lose that relationship, and then you can quickly get kicked out the door. So it's really important you don't make that mistake. The way that I like to describe nutrition to players, to kind of get them over the fact that a single meal is not good or bad, they wake up each day with an empty tank, and they have a unique set of requirements for energy, carbohydrate, protein, fat, vitamins, minerals, and water. And your goal is to meet those requirements. So a single meal is not going to do it. 2 meals is not going to do it. 3 meals, you're going to get close. 4 meals, like with snacks and whatever, you're going to be even closer. So you can't ask me if a 1 meal at breakfast is good or bad, because like the reality is it depends, as you just said. But yeah, that's a challenging question. And I think it's one of the most frustrating things about nutrition, because people want a certain answer. They want like a definitive answer. But we can't give it. But there are people that do give it. There are people that do say, yes, that's a bad meal. But that's wrong, you know, it's completely wrong. And that's where all the confusion comes in, is there is no definitive answer to that question. Because it really depends. Obviously the context behind which that meal is consumed, that meal relative to the other meals you've consumed, that meal relative to your requirements, and like, yeah, there's loads of different variables and factors that are at play, that makes it very confusing.
So how do you manage that? Because we talk a lot in terms of S&C sports science in terms of managing the individual within the team setting. So obviously with the amount of players you're working with at the moment, I think you mentioned 3 squads that you're working with currently. So there's a lot of players there. Are you looking at the individual approach for every single player throughout those squads? Or obviously have you got some sort of system in place that makes it a little bit easier, I suppose, to carry out your philosophy?
Yeah, and this is where I could do with like a graphic to kind of explain it in a way. So if you imagine like
Well, sorry,
one
Matthew,
ring.
just on that, if you've got it, I'll add it onto the YouTube video. But if you want to
Yeah, yeah,
describe
cool,
it for
awesome.
the guys that are listening on audio, and I'll add it onto the video.
Yeah, yeah, cool. So if you imagine you've got like a ring in the center, so like the central ring, and then another ring outside that, and then another one. So ideally, all the players would kind of like function within that ring, that central ring, and that's basically where they're performing well. Their body composition is great. They've got no nutrition related issues. They're just kind of like free flowing within that circle. They just evolve within that circle. We don't need to really intervene that much because they're within that central circle. When they drop out of that circle into the outer, into the next ring, then we can start, okay, well, we need to action something here that they're starting to like flag. It might be a hydration issue. It might be a body composition issue. It might be something else. And then they go into even further into the next ring, which is like the red ring, if you like. And that's where, okay, well, we need to have like an individual intervention now. So in terms of like going back to the initial kind of philosophy, really, like things have to be meaningful. Like people often like to talk about individual programs for footballers, but the reality is that in my early days, I developed individual programs for footballers, and they might work for a week, but the reality is that they're not going to work for long. So you need to focus more on behaviors and habits, and making sure that they're just hitting kind of like general guidelines. Because if you get like a prescriptive program, it's all well and good following that for a week, but then your missus cooks something else and you're like, oh Jesus, that's not on my program. So like people like to talk about individual programs, but I only utilize in like really individual programs if someone falls out of that inner circle. If they're in that inner circle, then like the reality is just touching base with them, seeing if everything's okay, just trying to keep them within that inner circle, really. And then yeah, as you say, with 3 clubs, it's incredibly challenging, but that kind of process and that practice really helps, because you'll often only get like 2, maybe 3 players dropping outside of that inner ring within a squad, so you don't have to intervene all that much. And if you shape the environment properly within that inner circle, like the default position is the right one. So obviously, if you have the menu set up, if it's periodized properly throughout the week to align with training, all that kind of thing, and if the recovery interventions are correct and the game day strategies are okay, and they're well educated. So we have quite a systematic education system. So each season starts with, obviously from a physical perspective, it starts with testing, but there's also nutrition testing. So we have nutrition knowledge questionnaires. Off the back of that, they kind of go off in their own separate directions. Okay, well, you don't know how to cook an egg. Let me teach you how to cook an egg. You don't know like what a carbohydrate is. I'm going to spend a year talking to you about carbohydrate. So that education system really helps them like exist within that kind of central zone, if you like. And yeah, that education system, I didn't really touch on that much, but that forms a big part of what we do. So it's really like programming and periodizing education around the individual, because everyone comes from different nationalities, different countries, different backgrounds. They all have different understanding of nutrition. So it's really important that we shape the education around that individual. One thing, again, one of the big mistakes that I learned early on was you can't try and get everyone in one room and try and present to them as a group, because it just fails. Because you'll get one person that knows about carbohydrate and you're talking to them about carbohydrate, and then they become bored and they start flicking things like flicking bogeys at their friend, at the other players, and then they get really distracted, and it just destroys everything. So no one learns anything. So I quickly realized, oh well, I'm not gonna, this is not gonna work. I actually kind of some players at Stoke City, not naming any names, but yeah, so from there we just went with the individual route. Or sometimes it's like focus groups, so smaller groups. So you'll have like goalkeepers, for instance, or like strikers, or people with similar like education needs. But yeah, that's.
And I know you've touched on a few already, and you might have covered the main ones. But in terms of challenges that you face working with players, are there any? And you have mentioned some already, that players not being able to cook and things like that. But what are some of the? Are there any other key ones that you face with players that you have to sort of tackle?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's probably what makes the job so interesting, really. Like, no day is ever the same. Um, it's obviously challenging and stimulating. Like, as we mentioned off air, really, I think most players have good intentions. So if they take on like a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet or any form of diet, I think it's with good intentions to try and improve. They're just not educated in how to kind of like find the best information. You know, they'll probably go on Google and do a quick Google search, or they'll rely on media messages or marketing and things like that, and or friends or their wife, and so you've got to understand their support network, and your education is not just for that single athlete, it's for the whole family, and for their whole support network. So when you're giving out recipes, make sure that you're giving it to their wife as well, because make sure it's interesting for her, because the reality is she's going to cook it. So yeah, there's so many different challenges, and I think it all stems from a lack of understanding, like fundamental understanding of nutrition. And I think in time, hopefully, with the more investment in like nutrition education within academies now, like you'll see most academies, at least within the Premier League and Championship, and also maybe down in the lower leagues as well, they'll have like either a full-time or a consultant nutritionist, and they're doing some really, really incredible work. I mean, I see it on social media, they're getting like 13-year-olds to cook things, and like it's incredible. So hopefully give it like maybe 5-10 years, those players are then going to filter into the first team, and then we're not going to have as many of those challenges. Obviously we still will, because otherwise it will be quite boring, but yeah, I mean, most of those issues, like obviously we had the most recent one, the vegan trend. I think it comes with good intentions, but they don't really consider the consequences, and they don't know how to manage it all that well. So as a nutritionist, I need to learn from sales and marketing. So like some of my biggest influences in recent years have been books like Made to Stick, and like The Power of Moments, and like How to Win Friends and Influence People, and things like that. So some real powerful books outside of sport. Made to Stick was probably like one of the best, I would say, in recent times. And obviously Start with Why, that was a good one. But yeah, because we're competing with marketing and sales of supplements, of different nutrition products. So if we want to compete with them or outcompete them, we need to be better than them. So we need to be better at them than at like delivering messages, delivering nutrition information. So yeah, learning from sales and marketing is a big thing. And then I guess another thing I'm a big believer in is not necessarily like stepping outside the comfort zone, but expanding the comfort zone. I think it's probably different in nutrition than other things, but we are creatures of habit. We like what we do, and we do what we like. And I think if you get someone to step outside of their comfort zone, I've often seen that's not really that effective in nutrition. In terms of behavior change, I like to phrase it as expand your comfort zone. So you need to kind of create like a progress ladder, if you like, and don't necessarily phrase it as step outside your comfort zone, because that kind of stimulates anxiety and fear, and ultimately they're going to run back to their comfort zone. So yeah, developing a progress ladder that kind of allows them to expand that comfort zone. So I mean, week 1 could be they could start off eating like Rice Krispies or Cocoa Pops. So week 2, okay, well, why not try porridge? Week 3, what can you add raspberries to that porridge? And then, you know what I mean? So you're expanding that comfort zone. You're not really changing, like making wholesale changes. We know that eventually, like the gold standard meal might be like including some protein and eggs and stuff like that in the breakfast. But the reality is I want to try and expand their comfort zone, rather than getting them to jump from A to B, and then they're probably going to drown and then swim back to A. But I've kind of gone a little bit off topic there, but that's kind of how I deal with them, with the trends and stuff. And yeah, there are so many, and you have to understand the source of those trends. So obviously with the vegan thing, it was the documentary. So you have to kind of educate them on that documentary and like find out where that information came from, and then examine it and present it to them in a different way and get them to like fully understand it. But yeah, there's so many challenges. Like some common issues that I've seen among like elite players is failure to consume enough carbohydrate, failure to consume enough calories in general. I think there's a big negative connotation around carbohydrate intake. Again, kind of stemming from the media, probably from their wife as well. So yeah, they're two big things. And then hydration is a big one as well. Obviously, if they're playing FIFA on the PlayStation, they don't want to like waste time, pause the game and take a big glug of water. They prefer just to kind of continue playing FIFA, so they get pretty dehydrated in those circumstances.
I think there's some great points in there, and I love the expanding the comfort zone. I think that's a really great analogy, because I think a lot of times when we do just try and stamp this new program on a player and we say, right, you vet like this one day, but then day 2 you're going to eat completely new way of approaching things, and this is your new diet. It can be really hard, can't it? And we're all creatures of habit, and I think when you touched on habit, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I guess one of the downsides of football really is we don't often have the time to establish that like progress ladder. I mean, if you go back to the circle thing that I was talking about, if a player drops out of that circle and the gaffer or the head coach sees it, he'll be like, well, he needs to get back in that circle within 2 weeks, or like he's getting fined. So I've got 2 weeks to get this like ladder, to get progress ladder, and it's just not enough time. So yeah, football is kind of creates a difficult environment to establish those behavior change models, but yeah, you do your best.
I think the other side of it, where there needs more education from my point of view, especially in football, is that when you're talking there about players cooking with the wives and the wives liking the food and all that sort of stuff, and then being influenced by certain trends and things like that might come from family, friends, essentially, and obviously it depends on the personal circumstance, but those wives, those friends aren't necessarily professional footballers that have got to go out and perform at a weekend. And that's the difference, isn't it? The way that the wife or friend could treat nutrition, it needs to be quite different to how a professional footballer is going to step out onto a pitch every weekend and perform day after day, game after game.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, that's kind of where it boils down to the education of like getting a player to understand their unique requirements. You've got to the player has to understand that they're not a member of the general public. They need more carbohydrate. They need more fuel. So like one of the ways I describe it, you have like petrol tanks like this in your muscle. Every time you eat carbohydrate, it goes up. Every time you like do a sprint or any powerful activity, it drops. And when it drops like completely, you've got no fuel left, and you can't do those high intensity actions, and then you feel fatigued and your performance suffers. So you've got to get them to understand how different they are to a member of the general public, and like a sedentary individual, their tank is not going to drop at all, really. So yeah, getting them to understand the differences between them and their friends and them and their family members is really, really important. And obviously from a supplement perspective, it can become really challenging as well, because obviously they run the risk of like a failed drugs test if they take the same supplements as their friends. I mean, this period that we're in now makes it really challenging, because some of them have been influenced by their friends, and obviously the immune system has become a big topic of conversation, and their friends are taking like these different herbs and things and like wacky supplements, and then recommending it to players. And then fortunately for me, the players are quite open and honest, and they'll send pictures and say, well, is this okay for me to take? But I can imagine there's other clubs where that doesn't happen. And there might be obviously some real repercussions there. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really important point. So just to sort of wrap up the trends section, because I think this is quite an important part, because it's very current. Like you said, there's been documentaries out there where it's sort of caught people's attention. But in terms of if a player turns around to you and says, I'm thinking about trying a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet, what sort of things would you get them to consider? What are some key considerations that they need to try and make?
Yeah, a good question. First and foremost, like I'd kind of ask them like why, like what the purpose of it is, and obviously it could be like just an interest, or it could be like an ethical choice or things like that. So you have to establish like why they want to do it, and I wouldn't necessarily say, okay, well you can't do it. Like I'd present the various pieces of information. Okay, well, like a vegan diet is generally lower in calories, so you're gonna have to eat, like the volume of food is gonna have to increase to meet your calorie requirements. Obviously, you have the protein issue, so the quality of the protein, the amino acid profile is gonna be like considerably different from animal sources, from plant sources, sorry. And then you move on to like the micronutrients, so things like calcium is less bioavailable in plants, and iron and things like that. So I think once you present that data and you present the potential consequences, that it can get them to think, okay, well maybe this is not the best choice for me. If they're still interested, then fair enough, we can make a program. But if they are still interested, then they kind of fall outside that outer ring, because it's then a red flag for me, because the reality is they don't know how to manage that properly. So we're going to have to have like a bespoke program for them. Obviously, we're going to have to increase their energy intake from like fats and things like that, and get carbohydrate is generally not an issue with the vegan diet. It's the micronutrients and the protein that's the particular issue. So in many cases, like at least initially, you'll see like players maintaining performance, or kind of maybe even improving their performance because they're eating more carbohydrate, and they've kind of got that halo effect of the diet itself. They're following like a trendy diet, so they feel good. They've got that like mental side of it, psychological side of it. But then obviously over time, the failure to meet the protein requirements, that starts to kick in, and that you drops in lean mass, and then you start experiencing those side effects. So yeah, from the get-go, you have to present the diet in all its in its entirety, show them what it consists of. Did you know that you can't eat eggs? Eggs are your favorite food. Did you know that? You can't eat that. And oftentimes they don't know that. They're like, oh, well, I thought you could eat eggs. No, you can't eat chocolate either. Oh no. So yeah, present it like what they can and can't do, the consequences. And then if you like build the program for them, the likelihood is they'll probably follow it for 2 weeks and then get bored and just go back to their normal comfort zone.
And I know you mentioned before about one of the challenges being the amount of calories, and it probably caught a few people's attention because a lot of people talking about lowering calories a lot for like the general population, people eating low calorie food. But again, we're not talking about sedentary people, we're talking about athletes. And I think it'd be great to get your perspective where you worked in with the armed forces as well, because obviously these are guys that are going into battle. They've got to be fueled. You can't be sending them in on deficits or anything like that, because at the end of the day, who cares if they've got a six-pack? They're going into essentially a war. So if people are, or players, lower on, and I know they're not going to know this just by off the top of the head, but if players are looking to eat more to try and get more into the system, what would be some strategies you'd use with players?
Yeah, so I mean, first and foremost, you can just look at altering the serving size of their normal meals. So obviously the objective is to create a surplus of energy. Like that's the primary objective. We can do that in various different ways. So obviously you can play with the habitual diet. So don't make too many changes, just kind of keep them within their comfort zone. They're used to eating these meals. just add an extra spoon of carbohydrate, or add a little bit more protein, or add a little bit more fat. So when they're going to like make a meal, they're used to having like mashed potatoes and steak. So they can have like 3 spoons of mashed potatoes if they normally have like 1 spoon, for instance. And that's going to maybe add like 250 calories maybe to that one meal, not just with the potatoes obviously, but if they like add that principle, and then over the course of a day, it's going to create a surplus. We can also focus on snacks, because obviously if you like increase the size of meals, then appetite will become an issue, and like players feel really full and heavy. So taking advantage of snacks, so in between meals. So can we add some like nutrient rich snacks? So like you can make like something as simple as like toast and peanut butter, something as simple as that. That's a real easy way to add additional calories. And most of them now have blenders. You can blend fruits, some milk, and and some peanut butter as well if you need additional calories. And then before bed as well, there's an opportunity there to consume some protein, and obviously yogurt is a great example in that circumstance. Just find out what the individual's habitual diet looks like, find out where the opportunities lie. Can they add more to an existing meal, or can we add in some extra snacks? And like drinking calories is pretty easy. So obviously like energy containing drink fluids, so smoothies, milk, flavored milk, things like that.
Awesome. I could talk about this stuff all day, Matthew, and I don't want to keep you all day, because I know you've
Right.
got things to
No,
do.
trust me, I could as well. Trust me, like this topic gets me fired up. I mean, in the early days, like you wouldn't believe how like obsessed I was on nutrition. Like in university, it was getting kind of scary, really. I was not going out on nights out because I was like reading papers. And when I was at University of Chester, we like during the week, obviously we went to university, but on the weekends I'd meet up with a guy called Joseph Agu. He's a nutritionist as well, and we just used to sit in Starbucks literally from 9 a.m. till the time it closed, and just talk about nutrition. And like it became a bit of a problem. I was just like a social retard in a way.
No, I think it's important, just because my passion with it comes from the fact that the information out there is just so confusing. So I always think that if we could do anything to sort of clear it up and give people some perspectives and try and give them similar circumstances to what they're in and the way they're thinking, and I think it's really important, which is unfortunately what a lot of these documentaries don't do. They just add to the confusion a lot of the time, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the big issues there is the truth is kind of boring. Like it really is. Like if you try and explain like a balanced diet to a member of the general public, by the second sentence they're probably asleep on the floor. You know, it really is like boring. Whereas the trends and things, they're really exciting, and they get you like quite stimulated. They get you bought into it. So I think that's where myself as a nutrition practitioner, that's where we have to learn from these marketing guys and these sales guys, and we have to take those messages, like made to stick is a big one, the power of moments, all those kind of things. How do we make our messages sticky, and how do we make a message stick in their mind so when they go home like 4 hours later they're still thinking about it? How do like we make them resonate with our messages? That's a big thing.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing I wanted to ask, sort of to bring the podcast to a close, is in terms of the future for yourself, in terms of where you see that going, whether you've got any sort of speaking engagements. Obviously, it's a little bit different right now in terms of in-person ones, but any speaking engagements or anything coming up, but also the future of sports nutrition and the approach.
Yeah, so the future for myself, obviously, still working at the various clubs. I really enjoy. I'm fortunate enough to work with some incredible clubs and some incredible athletes as well. I mean, we're in like different positions. So with Brentford, we're obviously pushing for promotion. With Chelsea women, we're second in the league. Well, with a game in hand, so we're pushing for the trophy there. Multiple trophies actually, so we could even win the treble. And then West Ham, we're kind of in a bit of a battle down at the bottom. So we're all in different positions. So they all bring about different challenges. So in terms of myself, we continue working with them. I guess longer term though, I'd like the idea of having like a full-time role in sports nutrition. I don't think like consultants are as open or as honest about this as they probably should be. I know that Rob Pacey, I think he put a few tweets out the other day about it, like obviously opening up about his experiences, and I would kind of echo his thoughts really. And there are like massive bonuses. Obviously, as a consultant, I've been able to work like anywhere in the world. Like I literally get phone calls like all the time with different opportunities, and as a consultant, I can take them. But then on the flip side, you have to be on all the time. When I go into West Ham, like, and I have to be on it. Like I have to perform, because I'm only there for a few days, and like if I don't perform, then I'm dispensable, you know. And the clubs that you work for, they don't really take into account the fact that you've had to travel like from various different places. They don't account for the fact that you've got a 2-year-old kid who's like keeping you up at night, you know. So as a full-time employee, I think they're probably a little bit more like lenient on that, you know. But as a consultant, it's really challenging. So, and I also think I'm more effective as a full-time employee. I think if you look at like the top clubs in the Premier League, most of them will have a full-time nutritionist, and they're obviously doing a really great job. So not that I want to stop working with all the clubs that I'm working with, because I really enjoy every single one of them. So, and if I was offered a full-time job, it would be incredibly difficult. But I think for me, and my family as well, that would be a better move, certainly. And then yeah, just as a practitioner, just continue to learn, continue to be passionate about what I do, and continue to develop as well. And yeah, so I mean, I've still got L plates on as much as the rest of us. You know, I'm still learning, still being challenged, still stimulated. Sorry. And then in terms of speaking engagements, I was due to speak at the World Football Academy with Raymond Verheyen. I'm not sure if that's going to be like online or not. I'm not sure. And then I was also speaking at like a goalkeeper conference in Gibraltar, but that's been cancelled, and I'm not sure if that's going to be online. And then on the 30th of April, I'll be speaking at Charles Ashford's nutrition conference. So that's like an online thing. So yeah, and the future of sports nutrition. Obviously, we've got some unanswered questions in terms of like the problems we face in practice. So yeah, we'll just continue to answer those questions. And yeah, just continue to learn from like more about behavior change and things like that, and start focusing more so on that aspect, like actually working with the people, not necessarily like wider interventions and stuff, because I think we're pretty good at periodizing nutrition and like optimizing recovery and adaptations and all that kind of thing. I think most practitioners are pretty comfortable with that. I think the next step is, okay, well, we really need to get better at influencing people. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
I think that's brilliant, mate. And like I say, I could keep you on here for a good few hours, but I'm not going to take up all your day. You can go and spend your time with your little one when they're up and about.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm sure you'll like that.
But just in terms of if anyone's got any questions, Matthew, or they want to reach out for whatever reason, is there anywhere best to do that?
Yeah, so I have obviously Twitter. So Twitter's like probably the best place. I haven't like Instagram as well, but I don't really like do much on there. So my Twitter, I think, is like @MattJonesNC. My email address, if anyone has any emails or any like more detailed questions, is matt@mjnutrition.co.uk. And we also have a blog with myself and Jace Delaney. It's sportperfx.com. We've put some like pretty interesting things on that blog. Not recently, because we've both been incredibly busy. Jace with the Boston Celtics and me with over here in the UK. But there are some pretty cool things on there, so you can check them out as well.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. It's been great chatting to you, and hopefully we'll get another
Yeah, thank
in the
you.
future, because I still think there's plenty of areas that we could delve into.
Definitely.
If you're
Yeah,
up for it, I'd be glad to have you on again.
that would be awesome. Yeah, thanks very much for the invitation. And this was actually my podcast debut, so I hope I did. I hope I did the world of sports nutrition proud.
I think you did, mate, and I'm looking forward to getting it out to everyone.
Thanks, man.
Cheers, mate. Thanks a lot.
Cheers, Ben. Bye now. Bye.